Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk about today the importance of what socialism really is, particularly economic socialism in correlation to the importance of food sovereignty versus centralized exploitative capitalism. So let's start off with the definition of what economic socialism really is. Socialism is a populist economic and political system based on the public ownership known as collective or common ownership of the means of production. Socialists contended that shared ownership of resources and centralized planning provide a more equal distribution of goods and services and more equitable, which I actually agree with. So let's get into it. So the definition of worker cooperatives, which is often conveniently left out of the conversation of socialism, which obviously is designed to empower the worker, which is why the hierarchical capitalist only seeks to give the people a watered down or weaponized version of socialism as the only meaning of with the meaning like a welfare state of dependency. That's the definition that they argue without adding cooperatives. So economic democracy creates the condition of self-governance, food sovereignty, which creates the healthy people, which should be the end goal for those of us that are health advocates. And I'm sure people would agree on that, if you're a humanitarian especially. So let's start with the Professor Wolf article here, which I find very interesting. And let me pull up the title here. The front cover page which is called Socialism and Worker Co-ops. Very interesting. Traditional socialism stressed micro-level social changes that promoted the socialized over private property. It means of production, socially planned distribution of resources and products rather than the distribution of via market exchange. They abandoned some of the limited efforts of the democratizing of enterprise structures relatively early and reverted to the employer-employee model of enterprise and organizations. The early ideas of socialism that had sometimes included democratized or corporatized enterprises gave way to a concept of socialism that adopted employer-employee structure and somehow necessary and universal. Interesting. Thus, what went missing in most actually existing socialism was genuinely socialized enterprise as the economic foundation or production of distribution. Those of us that banging our drums and recognition of the importance of promoting and building democratic worker co-ops are motivated by the need of response by what was missing before. This seeks to add the dimension of what absent about the discipline of positive achievements of what the both actual existing socialisms and the movements seeing transitions beyond capitalism need. We are motivated by the further belief that some of the negative aspects of actually existing socialism were the consequences of what was missing from them. But that makes it doubly important to identify and supply that was missing. So obviously socialism means to create a decentralized form of capital resources which does not create or resilient or hierarchical structures. In fact, economic socialism or economic democracy generally works better in non-hierarchical dominant structures. You see, which is important. Worker cooperatives were organized to manage and direct the workplace division of labor democratically have a historically almost as old as the human race. They represent a stark alternative to the undemocratic hierarchical organization of past and present, such as the Salve or feudal with their master-slave and lord-serf divisions. Worker co-ops likewise differ from the capitalist enterprise foundations in different division between the employer versus the employee. Again, it's employee versus employee. So what Professor Wolf article tells us is that hierarchy can come in many different names, and it can be used to oppose the left, to oppress the left as well as oppress the right. It often produces illusions of freedom and progress by forcing us to choose the neoliberal rule over neocon rule by a clever rebranding process, which I agree with, obviously. Here's another piece from Professor Wolf's article. It's interesting. Worker co-ops make each worker both an individual wage earner and an equal member of the collective of workers, functioning as the employer as the corporate board of directors. They thus require to develop within each worker abilities, tastes, and demands for participation in all workspace decisions and likely to other sites society as well. Thereby, economically power devolves the capitalist concentration of majority of the top worker owners, directors, or enterprises. Download the democratic collective of all workers. Worker co-ops converted workplace into genuine democratic communities, something capitalists and enterprises could only ever pretend to support elsewhere in society. Which is, I agree with also. So I'm going to now pull up an article that clearly is the antithesis of what social economic democracy called the Great Reset, which projects stakeholder capitalism as some kind of free techno-utopia, which couldn't be further from the truth. So this is what globalists perceive a techno-utopia as looking like. Own nothing and be happy. The Great Reset's vision of the future. World Economic Forums will tell us about the plans for the humanity in the year 2030. That's scary. The World Economic Forum annual meeting at the end of January in Davos, Switzerland, brings together international businesses and political leaders, economists, and other high-profile individuals to discuss global issues driven by the visions of the influential CEO Klaus Schwab. The main driving force of the dystopian Great Reset and tectonic shift that intends to change how we live, work, and interact with each other. Wow. The Great Reset entails a transformation of society resulting in permanent restrictions on fundamental liberties and mass surveillance as entire sectors are sacrificed to boost their monopoly and hegemony. And pharmaceuticals, corporations, high-tech big data giants, Amazon, Google, major global chains, and digital payment sectors, biotech concerns, etc. Using COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions to push through this transformational, the Great Reset is being rolled out under the guise of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, in which older enterprises are to be driven to bankruptcy, to absorb into monopolies, and effectively shutting down huge sections of our pre-COVID economy. Economics are being restructured, and many jobs will be carried out by artificial and driven machines. In a short video showcasing social media and WF products that's in 2030, you will be own nothing and be happy. A happy smiling face is depicted while a drone delivers a product to your house, no doubt ordered online and packaged by a robot in a giant Amazon warehouse where no humans were involved in manufacturing or packaging that your product. Reset is assured. Rest assured that virus and bacteria are free. Even in 2030 will be the need to keep the fear narrative and alive and well, to maintain full spectrum of dominance over the population. Does this sound like a free techno-utopia to you? It sounds more like a technocratic Orwellian nightmare to me. Let's continue. The jobless, and there will be many, could be placed in some kind of universal basic income and have their debt or indebtedness and bankruptcy on a massive scale is the deliberate result of lockdowns and restrictions written off in a return for handing their assets to the state, or more precisely the financial institutions helping to drive this Great Reset. Wow, that's disturbing. That is disturbing. This sounds like a great recipe for a society that could force many into a position of being a debt-free, homeless, broke slave that no longer have the capacity to grow their own organic garden. Let's read some more. The WF says the public will rent everything they require, stripping their right of ownership under the guise of sustainable consumption and saving the planet. Of course, the tiny elites who rolled out this great reset will own everything. Hundreds of millions around the world were deemed surplus and requirements are to be robbed and currently being robbed in their livelihoods, and many movements and purchases are to be monitored, and our main dealings will be online, like online purchasing, online work, everything will be online, which we see that going on right now already. We can see that this agenda is unfolding right in front of our very eyes, especially with the loss of homes and property, and the inability to grow healthy food, while Bill Gates coincidentally becomes the largest farmland owner in America. Here is evidence of that right here. I'll read you some stats. Bill Gates is reportedly the largest farmland owner in America. Bill Gates may no longer be the world's richest man, but he can claim a new title, America's farmland king. The billionaire Microsoft co-founder has become the largest owner of farmland in the United States by quietly buying up massive amounts or massive plots across the country, and a new report says. Gates' portfolio comprises of 242,000 acres of farmland and nearly 27,000 acres of other land across 19 states, according to the Land Report, a magazine for land investors, and tracks the nation's biggest landowners. The biggest chunks of Gates' holdings are in Louisiana, Arkansas, where he owns 69,071 acres and 47,927 acres, respectively, the outlet's research found, which is amazing in itself. What this essentially means is that most of the public will have to rely on Bill Gates' bioengineered, vaccine-injected foods, which somebody like me that understands nutrition and haven't taken a vaccine in over 20 years, which are forcing the public to ingest a virus vaccine without our consent. So let me read to you a few excerpts from an article that these mad scientists are doing to our food supply that could negatively affect our health, and why I don't believe that a vaccine should be mandatory, because of number one, vaccine has benefits. Now, one vaccine has benefited everybody, and the other one, there are also viable alternatives to that they either don't know or they're not willing to tell you because there's some kind of conflict of interest. So GMO tomatoes and the edible COVID-19, Mexican scientists work to make it a reality. While larger companies and public sectors conundrums in the United States, Canada, China, and Europe are running at full speed to develop a vaccine grown in genetically modified GM tobacco plants. A research group of Mexico University is working toward the same objective, but in an innovative strategy. They are using a bioinformatics and computational genetic engineering to identify a candidate antigen for the vaccine that can be expressed in tomato plants. Eating in their fruit from these plants would then confer immunity against COVID-19. This approaches used for their production don't differ much from the ones classically used in the vaccines, where the antigens and compounds of the pathogen used to generate immunity into patient, where the inactive virus as well as the genetic material of the virus protein, which is grown in this large scale of chicken eggs, malnourished insect cells, tissue, genetically modified microorganisms. Boy, that sounds like a cocktail of nasty stuff. Oh boy, this is the stuff they are trying to convince us that is going to build up our immune system and keep us healthy. So I'm going to conclude this video by thanking you for watching. And if you want to hear the extended version of this podcast, you can click on the link below to listen to on the Third Eye Productions show on Spotify. Thank you and have a nice evening.